Hey there, my name is Andre Camillo, and in this video, I'm going to talk about Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, why it exists, how it can help you achieve some of your cybersecurity and business goals, and how you can start using it. Let's get into it. Okay, so let's start from the beginning. Whenever I talk about the Microsoft cybersecurity architecture, I always go back to the MCRA document, which you can see on screen. MCRA stands for Microsoft Cybersecurity Reference Architecture. It is a public reference of everything in the Microsoft cybersecurity documentation. And as you can imagine, this is very wide and in depth into the cybersecurity reference architecture. So this here's public document. You can come in here in this link, and I'm going to paste that into the description. You can download this file. It's a PowerPoint, which essentially talks you through everything that Microsoft currently has in our architecture. So that's very important to get started and to understand how Microsoft is tackling major cybersecurity themes such as cloud security, endpoint security, server security, information protection, how we should be talking to different stakeholders at organizations from a people perspective, and so on and so forth. It also covers zero trust and related topics such as SASE. How does Microsoft tackle SASE, and how does it fit in with the current offerings from Microsoft? Now, this here is a very good document. So first thing I would advise you to do is go ahead and download it, read through it thoroughly. It has key points and notes. So very good document. Let me just jump on it. So this here is the PowerPoint itself. Again, public document. You can go ahead and just download it and access it yourself. So everything here is essentially clickable, so you can just navigate through it using the interface here if you're ever presenting on it. What I would like to focus here is how Defender for Endpoint is approached in the overall architecture. So the first thing I would like to highlight is this slide right here, which is an all-in-one. It's a one-pager for everything Microsoft security. And as you can see, it is a lot of information. So we would never really have enough time to cover everything that's in here. This is just to give a glimpse of how in-depth or how wide, what's the breadth of coverage that Microsoft has in its portfolio for security. Now, what I would like to discuss and briefly bring your attention to is this section here on the top left corner, what Microsoft has for security operations, SOC. Okay, so when we think of solutions for the SOC, we think essentially of a SIEM, right? So such as Sentinel, which of course we have, and the SIEM is fed by everything in your environment. But most importantly, it's also fed by our XDR platform, Microsoft Defender tools, essentially. And within our XDR, Extended Detection and Response capabilities, that's where we have all the Microsoft Defender for servers and Defender for cloud components, which I briefly touched on a previous video. We also have Defender for Endpoint, which is the subject of today's video, right? So Defender for Endpoint is a component of the wider Microsoft Defender end-to-end story and capability. We also have other components of the XDR, such as Defender for Office, which protects emails. We have Defender for Identity for protecting on-prem Active Directories and ensuring that there is no anomalous behavior on identities. We have Defender for Cloud Applications, SaaS, and CASB visibility, right? And so on and so forth. And we have more capabilities that can be plugged in to our XDR for wider visibility. And when we start thinking about how XDR tackles current and modern threats, well, we're essentially looking at the modern attack chain or attack kill chain for threats. This here is a great slide that represents how modern attacks essentially jump from different domains, leveraging lateral movement or leveraging different attack vectors to try and get to your network and pivot and escalate privilege and exfiltrate data essentially. Great slide to exemplify how it's important to have all these different controls talking to themselves, right? There's different domain controllers talking to themselves. So when we think of email protection, having the ability to understand when someone clicked on an email that led to that email running and exploiting a specific piece of code on your endpoint is very important. It's paramount to your SOC so that they can find out a potential point of origin of an attack. Much the same when we see an activity from an endpoint trying to jump into a user account, and that user account trying to have its privilege escalated on the machine, and thus try to perform a specific very high risk scripts that are scanning the network or that are attempting to look for other hosts on the network. It is paramount to be able to understand this all from one timeline. This is where your XDR platform is important, and why it is important to have such a approach to cybersecurity. At the same time, there is the component of integrating all different alerts into the same tool with Microsoft Sentinel. Now, this goes beyond the scope of today's video, but Sentinel overseeing alerts and potential raw logs from everything in this chain, attack chain, gives you that extra visibility that you might need in order to investigate everything. When we start connecting integrating the actions of users versus file sensitivity and sensitive files handling, we start getting even more insights into what data was potentially even exfiltrated of your environment. So this is why having the Defender capabilities alongside Microsoft's robust information protection capabilities with Purview is paramount for good security and good, essentially, threat hunting on your environment. Now, from this slide, what I would like to touch on is talking about the capabilities of Defender for Endpoints to integrate with a wider architecture as well. As an endpoint protection platform, it is able to get signals from new payloads and new artifacts and new, essentially, hash files and files that are running on this machine and share that intelligence with the Microsoft Threat Intelligence Platform. That shared intelligence is then shared telemetry. That telemetry is shared against other devices as well to help us mitigate potential threats quickly into the future. That intelligence shared from the endpoint is also leveraged by other parts of our platform, such as Defender for Office 365 in this example right here. Now, depending on the risk that Defender for Endpoints reports to our platform, and we're going to touch on the risk component soon, but depending on the risk of that device, because it's outdated or because it is running a number, or it has a number of incidents that are potentially risky on that endpoint, we might even take on an integrated approach with Intune and Azure Active Directory to potentially temporarily suspend that user's access to applications from this computer to cloud applications that are holding sensitive files and sensitive data, for example. We might even block that user from accessing its Office 365 tenant because they might potentially, there might be a payload residing on that endpoint that is also having visibility of all sensitive files residing on that potential surface. And much the same with on-premise applications. So we can limit people's access to sensitive data and applications based on a device's risk assessment that we provide. The last part that I would like to touch on this slide is how it tackles security operations and SecOps integrations, and how Endpoint is one of the many buckets that are part of this integrated approach that Microsoft offers with its XDR. Looking at this image right here, we can see how these different buckets, they help feed and share signals, and each of these buckets will have dedicated intelligent capabilities to their domains, with dedicated alerting from each of these domains that are exclusive and very deep down into what they can do. So that's the value of each one of them, having that deep visibility into each of these domains. And when they push signals into the Microsoft Defender platform, it just gives us a lot more to work with when we're threat hunting. Okay, so jumping back to my browser, when we think of Defender for Endpoint as a solution, what have we got? Look, here I am looking at Defender for Endpoint marketing material essentially, but what do we get? We get an industry-leading solution. So AV-Test, Forrester, and Gartner have all recognized the power of this platform. Even MITRE organization has identified and is yearly recognizing the industry-leading capabilities of the platform to stop modern malware. I want to touch on its capabilities. Now, this document here or this page is great for you to have an understanding of all its capabilities, and I will leave you to this page later on as well, just for reference. But I will touch on all of this in the dashboard next. Before I do that though, I do want to scroll down here to talk about, again, industry recognition. Like I said, Gartner, Forrester, MITRE ATT&CK. I have lots of customers, but before I jump into the platform itself, I briefly want to touch on what plans have we got. We have essentially two plans, Defender for Endpoint Plan 1 and Defender for Endpoint Plan 2. Now, depending if you are a Microsoft 365 E3, as you can see here, E3 customers get access to MDE P1. If you're a Microsoft 365 E5, you get MDE P2, so parts of bundles, but these can be sold standalone as well. Now, what each of these bundles include, here's a quick list at all of it. I'm going to be demonstrating the capabilities from MDE, Defender for Endpoint Plan 2 next. Okay, so we're gonna see the unified security and centralized management. What does that mean? I'm gonna go look at next generation anti-malware, what that looks like, attack surface reduction rules, device control, and each one of them in here, plus all of that in the next section. All right, so just looking at Defender for Endpoint's dashboard, how do we get there? So I want to start off by talking about Microsoft 365 Defender dashboard, which is essentially where we're going to get all the information we need as a SOC analyst and a security engineer out of Defender for Endpoint. To get here, all you need to do is navigate to security.microsoft.com. Log in with your Defender for Endpoint enabled credentials, and you'll be then given access to the Defender portal, which essentially encompasses a number of overview dashboards with different lenses on top of your environment, but also different sections of all your XDR platforms, such as endpoints, which is the subject of this video, right? So this is where I can consume as a security engineer everything that Microsoft Defender for Endpoint can provide me. Within email and collaboration is where I get information from Defender for Office, for example. Cloud apps, Defender for Cloud apps. And at the very bottom here, I get the overall settings for the entire dashboard. Now, without going too much in details in this video for Defender for Endpoints, me as an engineer or as someone looking at everything that Defender for Endpoints can do, I can start onboarding devices on configuration management. I can look at how to manage endpoints from here as well. And I can start understanding and assess how my endpoints are doing from a vulnerability perspective, something I covered in previous videos. I can also look at how I can evaluate a few capabilities of the platform in here as well with Evaluation Lab and tutorials and simulations. But to get started, all I need to do is onboard devices into Defender for Endpoint. And how you can do that is to navigate to Settings. Under Settings, we'll have the settings for endpoints. Under Endpoints, we have the essentially device management section where we can onboard devices in our endpoints. Now, depending on your supported in the operating system that you are onboarding will might have different methods. So if you're onboarding Windows 10 and Windows 11 devices, you can onboard using a local script or using group policies or even using Intune or Endpoint Configuration Manager and a mobile device management of some of the other source and so on and so forth. Now, the easiest way to get started is just downloading a local script if you're just running a small, narrow proof of concept. So I would recommend downloading this onboarding package. What this onboarding package does essentially turns on the sensor and redirects the sensor telemetry over to your essentially dashboard in your tenant of Microsoft 365 Defender. Since for Windows devices, Defender for Endpoint is a process that is already set up in your device. All you need to do is enable the telemetry and start onboarding it by setting up a registry key with a local script. That's all it does, essentially, right? There's no agents to deploy for this particular operating system. If you were using Linux or macOS, you would have an extra step for that. But anyway, once you onboard devices, you can start running detection tests and testing it out. Once you have onboarded some devices, what you can do is navigate all the way to the top here on the menu, go into incidents, for example, and you can navigate and look at incidents in 365 Defender for up to 6 months. In my example, I want to look at what incidents have I got in my environment for the past 30 days. So I have a specific exit from this user, from an initial access here category, that is a travel involving one user. So this Defender 365 Defender is an XDR, so it's looking at more than just endpoint. So if I want to look at endpoint related incidents, I have to go back further in time when I had those incidents. Now, the benefit here from this is I can essentially filter out what sources I want to see these incidents for. So in this particular example, I just want to see incidents that are reported from Defender for Endpoint. But my XDR can also report from Defender for Office, from App Governance, Identity Protection, so Azure AD, and even other sources as well. Now, just looking at incidents for Defender for Endpoint, I have all of these different incidents here, right? So when I look at some of them include a specific ransomware or specific malicious activity that has been noticed by different endpoints. Of course, I can easily see what were the impacted assets, and some of them are tests machines in my environment, which I generated in the evaluation lab, all cloud-hosted, Azure, Microsoft-hosted operating systems and virtual machines. So very easy to test that out. If I wanted to find out more about a specific incident, I can just essentially open it up, right? So this is the power of an EDR capability within Defender for Endpoint. Endpoint Detection and Response is one of the capabilities of Defender for Endpoint, and as such, it allows me to have full visibility of everything going on in an environment, in a device. So down to the service, down to the script, and to the file name that's being modified at every single step of the way. And as part of an incident, I can have full visibility of all that up to 6 months back in time, okay, by default, or you can extend that in some different ways. What I do want to touch on here is that we are correlating all different alerts that are generated from this endpoint, and we're putting them under the same incident because they are all somehow connected because of different signals in different parts of the attack queue chain. And it generates one investigation for all of us as a security engineer to work on. Of course, we have ways to tackle this from an incident perspective. So I can manage this incident and I can assign this incident to someone from my organization if I want to. I can assign tags for this incident. I can change the status of this incident. So if it's an active incident that I haven't actioned yet, just leave it on active. If it's in progress, set it in progress, assign to someone, classify it according to the attack queue chain, or even to the status of this threat as per your assessment, You can comment and add comments as you go as well. So the platform helps you not only look at incidents, correlate alerts from Defender for Endpoint, but it also helps you see the attack story and play out the story even as it happened as well if you want. So right now, I have the platform telling me what event happened at each point of the incident timeline as they happened. And it helps you manage that incident as well from a ticketing perspective, if you will. Now, with all that said, this is just a very simple overview of the platform, how to get started on board your device and get started using the incident view of it. But I want to take the time to get more in depth in a follow-up video, which I will do soon. Thank you so much for joining and enjoy your day. Cheers.